Bat Force Radio.
Bat Force Radio is rated M for mature, or should that be immature?
Hey guys, Dustin Wynn.
Hey, this is Scott Snyder.
This is Paul Dini.
And you're listening to Bat Force Radio.
And you're listening to Bat Force Radio.
You're listening to Bat Force Radio.
This is Tom King. I write Batman Bitch, and this is Bat Force Radio.
Welcome back to Bat Force Radio, the DC-affiliated podcast with no limits. We are here with a full house tonight. First, let's bang out the round table here. We got the man from New York City, the Bat Force Times. We got our friendly Canadian who is the inventor of the You're Welcome cards, Robin Cross.
You're very welcome.
Out in California, we got Bat Force Tom.
Keaton is back, baby.
And also in California, Legends of Lego Batman.
It's a pleasure, Chip.
And joining us from New York City is Teasus.
Believe me.
And my name is Grandpa Batman. Tonight we have a very special guest that I'm very excited about. I've actually been wanting to have this guest on for quite some time. If you know anything about original artwork collecting, merchandise collecting, toy collecting, but also graphic design, this man is solely responsible for bringing book cover and publication editing to an art form. Joining us tonight is Chip Kidd.
Woo! Yes, finally.
Hi there.
How are you doing, Chip?
I'm all right. All right.
How's that humidity down there?
Well, outside it's pretty bad. But, in here it's okay.
So are you considered a snowbird at this point?
Well, I guess that's what they call it, but I've been down here for 3 months and counting, man.
Oh, yeah. You're a smart man. I stayed up in Gotham, and it's I would definitely weather some Floridian humidity at this point.
I'm going back up in August.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's better now, but if you're down there already, just weather it out. But how goes it? Are you? I take it you're still working a lot remotely at this point.
I am. Yeah. Although I'm in South Florida. I have a place down here, but what I did not have down here was a home office, so I had to put that together. But yeah, knock wood. Well, I work for Penguin Random House is my day job, and we've been doing okay. We've been doing okay, and technically you can design stuff anywhere. It's just when you go to print it out and all of that stuff that you wish you were back. I wish I was back in the office.
Yeah. How do you see print right now? Its role in this pandemic / post-pandemic world we're in right now?
I think it's just as important as it's ever been, but it's harder to get. Like if you want your comic book right away, then I guess you'll download it. But yeah. I'm all about the thing I want to hold in my hand, and I always have been. And when I started designing books, that was the whole point to me, was to design a book as an object.
True. I wonder if this climate we're in now is going to make people even more inclined to want something, tangible, something to hold in the hand and look at and open. And
our sales indicate that is what's going on. Yeah, I'm very grateful. People, they want their books and they want to read.
So for people who may not have been following your work as long as some of us have,
which is most of the population of the world.
Well, no, that doesn't really that isn't really the case with our listeners, though. I'm sure the majority of our listeners do know very well who you are, but some of the younger ones, who don't know most of the stuff that we're fans of, to catch some of them up. So obviously, to most of us, you're responsible for creating one of the most recognizable symbols in pop culture history. If for anyone who doesn't know, before Jurassic Park was a series of mega successful films, it came from a novel by Michael Crichton. And you designed the cover art for that, which went on to be used for all of the movie posters, and it has become the symbol that when anyone sees that symbol now, that skeleton of the T-Rex, they immediately know, oh, that's Jurassic Park.
Right.
But so years before this ever comes up, what was the thing that led you to that road to think, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to do graphic design. I want to create this art.
That's a really good question. I would say probably from when I was a very, very little kid, and it started with comic books. Comic books for me was one of the, I mean, I didn't think about it at the time, but it was one of the most communicative forms of graphic design because, you know, you can be 2 or 3 years old, and even if you can't read, you can get the story. You can sort of like figure out that something's going on. And you know, at the time, for me, that's like late 1960s into early 1970s and beyond. And so, you know, I remember there were, obviously it's not like now. And that was one way, that was a great way to get a story.
What was it do you remember the first comic you read?
Oh man, I remember there's that, I can't remember if it's Batman or Detective, but there's that cover where I think like Batman's being tugged in 2 directions, one by I think Batgirl and the other by Catwoman. And then there's that one Poison Ivy cover where I think he's like laying on the ground splayed out. Like those were the first ones that I remember seeing. These would have been like 1968, 1969.
Some of your first comic books were Batman. Now, for our young listeners that might not know, Chip Kidd is one of the most notable Batman collectors in the world. His collection has been documented and displayed, and me and Gramps and a lot of us and Teases had the fortune of going to the the Society of Illustrators presentation that you threw on, and that was to actually see parts of your collection in the flesh before us was just absolutely amazing. I mean, we saw some original Dark Knight Returns pieces, some commissions, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of your collection. What have you been collecting since you started reading comics all the way back then, and what is it about Batman in general that continues to draw your interest so prolifically?
Well, it's so hard to answer that question. I mean, I think we all have our own reasons for being so intrigued by the Batman mythology. It speaks to so many different kind of like aspects of society and us, and besides just being a great sort of escapist fantasy. But I was collecting Batman stuff since I was a little kid, but you know, I try to take care of it and not let it get like broken. But you know, you sort of like lose stuff and what have you. But I still have my Batman Lunchbox from '66, from when I was a kid, and it's filled with stuff in it that from when I was little. But I think I started like seriously collecting when I was in college, and that would have been the first half of the 1980s. And then I came, I studied graphic design at Penn State University. I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania, and but then when I graduated college, I beelined it for New York. So I got to New York the fall of 1986, which was, you know, when in comics wise, I mean, that was such a pivotal year. Dark Knight and Watchmen. And the first piece of original comic book art that I bought was at it's at a New York show at the Hotel Pennsylvania. And I'd say that would have been like 87 or 88. And I can't remember who, but this one guy had a bunch of original art from Dark Knight Returns. And, you know, I was on a starter salary with, you know, and I can see it to this day, like stuff that I could have gotten like back then for $1,000, But to me, that was a fortune. Like I couldn't afford that. So the first thing I got was this page, the super famous page where Batman in number 3, where Batman and Carrie Kelly are soaring over the city.
Right.
It's the page facing that.
You didn't get the money shot.
It's a perfectly nice page, but damn. But I can say I remember at the time it was $425. And
what the fuck?
Well, all right, but when you're 22 and you're making $16K a year, and living in New York City,
an arm and a leg.
That's a chunk of change. That's a
Eating
chunk of change. But even
2 months, I'd go with the Dark Knight. Yeah.
You can't even get that page for $16K now.
That was special.
That's second best to getting the Todd McFarlane soup can.
Soup can?
Yeah, didn't McFarlane ink a can in the supermarket scene? He was saying.
Oh, you know more than I do.
He said when he was a young up and coming artist, he was hanging out, and Klaus, kind of passed off some of the work, deadline wise and all this stuff to some younger assistants, and he actually got to ink that one of the opening scenes and panels in book 3 where he's dressed up as the street woman.
Wow. So I've never heard this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had Todd on a few months ago, and we squeezed the story out of him.
Yeah. Todd was
Good
spilling the beans.
That's awesome. That is awesome. I didn't hear that.
That's so great that you own those DKR. There was a whole story about how they traveled to different parts of the world to get original scans of that book to put together the gallery edition, and they're still searching. Did they scan any of yours, I take it, for the...
Oh, sure. Yeah. And of course, I'm blanking on his name, but the guy who owns Graffiti Designs, he was the real force behind that gallery edition. And he did an amazing job, and he came to my apartment. He came to my apartment and scanned them, and the scans were not good. So then I took, because I have 2 pages, and for better or worse, long ago I framed them together. So it's, you saw it at the Society of Illustrators, and the other page I got much later is one of the fight scene pages at the end of 3 with Batman and the Joker, and so he scanned them for the Graffiti edition, and because I wasn't going to take them out of the frame, and then that didn't work. So I took them down to my colleague Jeff Spears' photo studio in Soho, and we shot them professionally. Like, Jeff can shoot through glass, so you can't see the glass. So that's what we did.
Nice.
I'm guessing that second page was more than $425.
Yeah, but you know what? Not that much more.
Really?
Yeah, it was really. Does anybody remember the Buyer's Guide for Comic Fandom?
Of course.
Yeah.
Or you were all too young. This would have been probably the late 80s. And I don't know why. I was just scanning it, and somebody had that listed in the back of the Buyer's Guide, in tiny little type. And with a really decent price on it, and I thought, I don't believe this is real. So I think there was a phone number, and I called him up, and he's like, yeah. And I sent him a check, and I thought, if I lose the money, I lose the money. Well, it was real.
Wow.
It was real. And I waited in line at Village Comics for 3 hours to get Frank to sign it for me.
Yeah, I remember that story.
We've all been there waiting for Frank to sign things.
But it was worth it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And thank you for putting in that extra effort to get the pages scanned for that book. A few of us own that gallery edition, and it's fantastic.
Man.
It really is fantastic. It's a shame. What a job what a scavenger hunt to find all that stuff, because it's just scattered all over the world.
Yeah, a lot of it was found in the Philippines as well, if I remember correctly.
There's a different podcast that I listen to, and one of the episodes was with Frank Miller's art dealer back then in the 80s. And And he was the guy that you probably met that was selling all these pieces. And during his interview, he discloses that some of the pieces he wasn't really authorized to sell and didn't know that, and kind of had a falling out with Frank over selling some of those pages. It's pretty fascinating listen to.
Yeah, I mean, those kinds of stories are just very, very common. I don't mean with Frank, but I mean, I saw I have a classic page by Neil Adams from the Joker's Five-Way Revenge. Same thing. I think it was the back of the buyer's guide, and that wasn't all that much money. And I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem real either. But it was, and it's like, oh my God, it's Batman in the tank with the shark and the wheelchair, and like, oh, Dick Giordano signed it too. And I was just thinking, I'll bet Neil Adams doesn't know that this is AWOL.
Wow.
I think you have some nice Kingdom Come pieces as well, right? Original.
Yes. Now all of that is quite legit, and that's actually how I met Alex for the first time. There, I forget when Kingdom Come came out, what year it was, but there was, I had just come to New York, and there was a comic book art gallery in Soho called the Four Color Gallery, and he got lined up with them, and they had 2 art shows of Kingdom Come originals, and again, like, it was like right at the beginning. I mean, the book had come out obviously, but it hadn't like shot up the way it was going to. But this is one thing that was not in the Society of Illustrators show. That is how I got the cover for number 3, for Kingdom Come number 3. And I remember at the time I was like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. But I just thought, all right, clean out your savings and just get it, because you're going to have it for the rest of your life. And I miss it. All my I want to go back up to New York and just look at it. And anyway, that's how I met Alex, and then we eventually started working together.
Yeah, you guys been working a lot, especially at conventions. Really nice presentation for those. I think it was it a print signing with the book, or New York Comic Con?
New York Comic Con last year, you guys came down.
Yeah, for Marvelocity.
Oh, just on a side note, one of the most popular, I guess it's due to our listeners and fans who've been asking a question for a while, but have there been any possibility or rumblings about possibly reprinting or republishing Batman Animated, which has become like a cult classic for so many?
Yeah. All right, so here's the story on that.
Oh.
I mean, it's not an interesting story, but so that was that book came out in 1998. And so again, my friend Jeff Spear, we shot it at the Warner Brothers TV animation studios probably a year before. So it would have been the summer of 1997. And we shot everything on what's called 4x5 film, which is actual film. And, worked with Bruce Timm and Paul Dini and everyone there. It was really great. It was a great experience. But again, it was a real like scavenger hunt for me to decide like what that book was going to be, because, I didn't want it to look like a style guide for the show. It was supposed to be more about, what is all the art that has to get made by hand before you can actually begin shooting it. So when I started asking for storyboards, and they're like, what do you want those for? And I'm like, because I want to see them. Some of them are just gorgeous. And Bruce Timm did a couple of storyboard sequences by hand himself that are like historic comic book worthy. And so they're all in there. All right. So we published simultaneous hardcover and paperback. Technically, the publisher was HarperCollins. The book came out, like I said, in 1998. And I remember at the end, where they were there in California, and Bruce was like, "Oh man, So, the suits want Batman to be a teenager in the next series. And I'm like, what? What? And he's like, yeah, I have to do it. I have to do it. And I said, that's the stupidest idea that I've ever heard in my life. And he's like, yeah, I know, but I think I'm going to set it in the future. Nice. So, Bruce Wayne's going to be really old, and he's going to have to train this kid to be the new Batman. And my eyes are like rolling out of my head. Like, that is the shittiest idea I've ever heard. And he drew, he let us shoot these preliminary sketches of this thing that was going to be called Batman Beyond. And I was just like, that is so going to tank.
You didn't sugarcoat it.
Yeah. And so I sometimes I have a crystal ball and sometimes I do not. So, but what an amazing talent he is. It's just astonishing. And it's been so interesting to see what's become of that property since. Like, it's so beloved and developed, and
it's got its own fan base.
It's just great. It's just great. But anyway, I'm digressing. So,
Chip, did you hear about, related to that, just today they announced that Michael Keaton is in talks to come back as some form of Bruce Wayne, an older Bruce Wayne, as a mentor figure
in the Flash movie.
In the Flash movie.
Yeah.
No, I didn't. I haven't seen any kind of news feeds on stuff today. So
yeah. So even still, that Batman Beyond stuff is still kind of inspiring some stuff that's happening now.
Well, as well it should. As well it should. Anyway, the Batman animated book went into multiple printings, and then I think the option lapsed with HarperCollins, and because it's called licensed publishing, so you get what's called a term, and if they don't want to renegotiate the term, then it's done. And so apparently DC did not, and so Batman Animated went out of print. And then, I don't know, years went by, and then there was a revival and interest in the show, and DC came back to me and said, we want to reprint this book. And I said, well, don't look at me, go to HarperCollins. Did not have the films anymore to print it. I don't know why. I don't know why, but they didn't. And there it lies. We still have all the film that Jeff shot, but you would have to meticulously go back and recreate the entire book. And if somebody wants to throw a chunk of money at me to do that, it would probably be fun. But that hasn't happened yet. And there's been so much that's happened since then in the animation world. Like, one of my favorite shows ever was the Batman Brave and the Bold cartoon. That I want to do a book on that, but they're like, who's the audience?
Me.
I'm sure we can. Me, it's like, all right, you get you times 100,000, then we've got something. So it's just it's not so easy to do these things.
You worked on an episode of Brave and the Bold, did you not?
Well, only insofar as they did an animated sequence of Batmanga, which was just so incredible.
Batmanga was another thing I wanted to ask you about. So the story that I always understood was that David Mazzucchelli had become aware of the existence of these Japanese Batman stories, and through some process, it came into your hands to take over that job. How did that go down exactly?
That's pretty much the story. David has been a dear friend forever, and he was literally visiting me in my office one day. Let's see, this would have been in probably the early 2000s, I want to say. And he did a residency he did some sort of cartoonist's residency in Tokyo for like a year or 2 years. And his hosts, David Mazzucchelli is the J.D. Salinger of Batman. It's like he did like the greatest Batman story and then just kind of backed away from it and said, I'm never doing this again, and I'm going to go work on other kind of comics projects. But But his host sort of like found out that he was this great Batman artist, and they said, we used to have our own version of Batman, but nobody could sort of like show him anything. But what he said to me was, it's by this guy named Jiro Kawada, who did something in the early 60s called Eighth Man. And Eighth Man was turned into a very early Japanese black and white anime cartoon that was broadcast in the States when I was a kid, and we used to watch it. And it's absolutely amazing. Like if you go on YouTube, you can see a couple episodes of Eighth Man. It otherwise never made it to the States in terms of a film or anything like that. But the concept is basically RoboCop. And the RoboCop people completely stole the idea from Eighth Man. But it's beautifully drawn and beautifully designed, and I was like, oh my God, if the guy who did Eighth Man did Batman, I need to find that. I need to figure out if that really did exist and where to get it. And again, we're talking the early 2000s, so the web existed, but not the way it does today. And I was trying to research this stuff with just no luck at all. And then, but I was collecting Japanese Batman toys from the 60s, and I didn't realize they were connected, that they were related. And it all led back to the Adam West TV show. And when the Adam West TV show was released in Japan, it had a similar effect there that it did here. And so there was one publisher that bought the rights from DC to create their own Batman stories, and they did it for about 1.5 years. So I was able to track these down eventually with the help of a guy named Saul Ferris. He had seen that I was buying a Japanese Batman toy that was inauthentic, and I was paying a lot of money. And so he wrote to me, because you used to be able to do that back in those days, and saying, you don't know me, but you're going to get reamed. And I'm like, all right, well, thank you. Who are you? And he's like, my name is Saul Ferris, and I'm a personal injury lawyer in Chicago, and I'm obsessed with Japanese Batman. And so he and I found this stuff, and it was amazing. And that eventually became the Batmanga book. And then when the Brave and the Bold guys, they were doing a Batman Strange's Cases episode, and so they did Batman and Ruben from Mad Magazine, and then they did Batmanga. And so they made a 15-minute sequence of Batmanga that looks like Eighth Man, only in color. And it's sort of duotone color. It's not like full color, but they came up with a theme song and the whole bit. It's just brilliantly done.
Was he referring to the Nomura Batman? I believe the wind-up piece. That's one of the most well sought after Japanese Batman toys.
There's the Nomura, and it's Batman and Robin, and and they have these skinny legs, and it's weird because Robin is the same height as Batman, but they're really cool toys. They're beautifully.
I think they're wind-up.
Yes, they are wind-up. There's a couple of different varieties. They're wind-up. They're the most valuable, but there's one that's battery operated with a light in his chest that lights up, and then there's one where his head lights up. There's like 3 main Japanese Batman robots.
But just to cut back on the Salinger reference, I totally agree with you. And then I remember that I think me and Teasus, we noticed you at the art and design signing from Mazzucchelli. I think it was in February when he was doing
right before all this excitement happened.
Wow.
At the high school we saw you.
Yeah, we wanted to come say hi, but we were online at the same time to see him, and we're like, fuck, we're gonna lose our place, but Chip Kid's running around.
That was such an amazing experience, and that was like the last Comic-Con thing that I did before before COVID. And he I think it's online somewhere, but he did like a 30-minute and they did film it, and it's just great. It's all about, I mean, what a great mind he is, and talent, and what a great teacher and speaker. and it was an amazing opportunity to see him.
Yeah, he doesn't
see
do any...
He did. No, he doesn't. You'd have to take his class at the School of Visual Arts to otherwise see him do that, because he doesn't do conventions.
Yeah, we were lucky to see him right before the world pretty much went on pause. So, speaking of comics and print, in my hands I have Batman Death by Design with you and Dave Taylor. Gorgeous book. And wondering, do you still have more Batman stories in you in the foreseeable future? Is there any more that you would want to tell, or is this the one?
I have a zillion of them, and I have no idea how to approach DC Comics about doing it. My main contacts there were Mark Chiarello and Dan DiDio, and I'm on really good terms with Jim Lee, but he's a busy guy, and I'm unambitious that way. Like there's a ton of more Batman stories I would love to tell with specific artists in mind, and I don't know whose door to knock on for that.
Well, it'll be nice if they'll reach out to you, because especially at this current time, if you have numerous stories in your mind, I think Black Label would be a great place for you to be able to tell any story you can think of.
And that's the thing, I'm spoiled, because on pretty much all my projects, they came to me and said, "We want you to do this, would you do it?" And I'm like, yeah. And it's so I'm shitty at pitching stuff. Like, I have a great idea for a Joker story, and I know exactly who I want to draw it. Batman hits Joker so hard that he can't remember who he is, and in the meantime, he set up this whole sort of thing where someone's going to die if they don't help them in time, but he can't remember, and etc.
If you want to name drop the artist you have in mind, maybe it gets back around to them and gets the ball rolling.
Well, that's the problem. It's nobody you've ever heard of.
Try me.
Yeah, all right, I'll try you. It's a guy named Lars Lettero.
Oh, Lars, yeah, man.
Just kidding.
Great
The
drummer
only
for
Lars I
Metallica.
know is from the movie Heavyweights.
He's a brilliant illustrator out of Philadelphia, and this whole other thing that I've been working on is the Batman black and white cover project, and I just, for the last 7 years, I've just used it as a means to reach out to artists who I love, who either have drawn Batman a lot or not at all, and to get them to do it. And he's one of them. I used to see his work in the New York Times, and I just thought, this guy has such a brilliant command of line, and I reached out to him. I said, would you draw Batman for me? And the result was so stunning that I just thought, oh man, you've got to do a graphic novel. It's just, you'd be perfect for this.
I'm looking at some of his work right now, and yeah, that would be fantastic for Batman.
Can you? I'm impressed. Can you see his Batman black and white cover for me at all online? It should be online someplace. And he's sort of like perched on a chimney top.
Yep, I see it.
I mean, do you not want to see a whole book by that guy?
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Do you like to collect just published artists, or does it just anybody that catches your eye, especially nowadays with social media being able to find a lot of new talent out there?
Well, I'm completely open. Like, the whole Batman black and white cover project has really opened up my head as an art director to reconnect with actual pen and ink illustrators or painters or what have you. It's just been a way for me to kind of wake myself back up to the fact that there are still all of these amazing illustrators out there, some of who are up and coming. The latest one that I've connected during the quarantine is a guy named Tyler Bentz.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he is amazing. He's absolutely amazing. And so he's doing a black and white cover for me as we speak, and seems like a really great guy. He is.
He's a really solid, cool guy.
Yeah.
I've been talking with that guy for a couple of years.
I'd like to talk him into doing a graphic novel at some point.
I second that.
That'd be amazing.
I second that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting to find new talent. And I'm so often late to the table, but that is what Comic-Con is for. Like I wanna walk down Artist Alley for 4 days and just see people and meet people, and it's like, oh my God, I didn't know you existed, but you're great, and that's what it's for. Oh my God, there it is, right?
Yeah, I just threw it up pipe chat for everyone to see.
How good is that?
Nice.
How good is that?
That is solid. Now, with your process in design, you approach so many everything differently. I like everything straight to the drawing board and a different concept and a way of thinking for everything you design in terms of book jackets and so on and so forth.
That is correct. It's very important.
What was the process like when you were deciding on your Dark Knight 3 Master Race variant cover? I was always curious about that.
Oh man, I mean, it almost designed itself. Like I went back, my memory told me that, all right, when the mutant scratched Batman's chest in the fight in number 2, he left 3 scratch marks.
Right.
And so I went back and I looked, and sure enough, he did. And then I thought, well, there it is. There it is. And so I thought, all right, I need to paint this myself. And I went to the art store and got my brushes and got my paint tubes. And at the time, the Batman 3 #1 blank variant had come out. So I bought a couple of them and I used it and I painted right directly on that.
Oh, okay.
Just, for karma. It just made sense. And there it was, and I have to say, like, DC, and that was Mark Chiarello, and it was a dream job, and I just did it, sent it to them, and they said they loved it. Like, that was it. There wasn't any other ideas that I had for it.
Yeah, I was like, wow, look at that texture, the way, I don't know, it was so interesting.
Well, that's Jeff photographing it.
Now, going back to...
Do you still have that original cover?
Yes, I do.
Of course. It was out on display at the Society of Illustrators.
That's right. It was. Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Circling back to your Death by Design book.
Mm-hmm.
One, the cover and interior page where he's punching Joker was on at the Society of Illustrators. So anyone who got to see that in person, that was an amazing experience. How did you get together with Dave Taylor to create this book?
Okay, so what happened was, and I can't remember the year, but it is on YouTube. I was asked to interview Neil Gaiman on stage for the 25th anniversary of The Sandman, or whatever year it was. I'm pretty sure it's 25. And this was at a place in New York called the 92nd Street Y, which is this really terrific venue that gets writers to present their work. And they asked me to do it. And I'm like, oh my God, I would love to. And so I'm interviewing Neil on stage, and somehow we started geeking out about Batman. Had a really nice conversation, and then afterwards, backstage, Dan DiDio came up to me and said, which was kind of surprising to me given my track record, he's like, I had no idea you were such a Batman fan. And I'm like, isn't that public knowledge by now? And he's like, you should do a Batman graphic novel for us. And I'm like, don't say that unless you really mean it. And he's like, yeah, I mean it. Just send us a proposal. And it was like this dream come true, but it's also sort of a nightmare, because it's like, all right, this is the chance of a lifetime. What the hell story am I going to tell? And what do I want to see as a fan that I haven't seen? And that's hard. And it kind of grew from there. And I'm a huge Fritz Lang fan. and I'm a huge Hugh Ferris fan. These are, I mean, they're two very different people, two very different artists, but you know, I've been mesmerized by the silent movie Metropolis since I was a kid, and like, oh my God, if this could only actually be about Metropolis and, you know, superheroes, and then this guy Hugh Ferris was an architectural renderer from the 20s and 30s that Bruce Timm took a lot of inspiration from for the look of Gotham City for Batman the Animated Series. And so like that to me was going to form the look of whatever this was going to be. It was going to be like a movie. It was going to be, and I remember as a kid seeing old 1930s movies, black and white movies on TV, thinking, oh, why can't there be a great old black and white Batman movie? And I mean, there was in the 40s, but it's not so great. But anyway, I tried to envision like whatever the art direction of this story is going to be that. And then you had to figure out, all right, so then what's the story? And in New York, I think in the early 2010s, there were these series of mysterious construction crane collapses in Manhattan, and it was just amazing. Like they were one after the other, where this big giant fucking crane would just fall onto the street and just obliterate everything in its path and kill people. Ooh. And it was like, well, why the fuck did that happen?
Yeah, seriously.
And then it kept happening. And I'm like, you know, Batman geek that I am, I'm like, wait a minute. Like if Bruce Wayne really existed, he'd really be on this.
There's a crime and you got to solve it, right?
Yeah. This inner city payola corruption is what, but nobody was convicted. It was like, holy, there were trials, but it was just amazing. And so there was that, and then there, if you live in Manhattan for a while, eventually you have to either go in or out of Penn Station, and you realize that it's the worst, shittiest experience of your life, and it's one of the most traveled transit hubs on the East Coast. It's the most traveled transit hub on the East Coast, and it's just this piece of shit basement of Madison Square Garden. And then when you look at the original Penn Station, it's just so soaring and glorious and beautiful. And what happened was in the early 1960s, you know, before there was anything like a Landmarks Commission, these people who wanted to build Madison Square Garden said, we're going to tear this place down and, you know, rebuild it as this shitty basement and then make Madison Square Garden. And so, as odd as it sounds, like I was like, what if these two kinds of urban crimes were related? And what if it all had to do with Bruce Wayne and his father, Thomas, and that family's legacy in the 1930s? And so that was my pitch. And I had a couple of ideas of people who I wanted to draw it. And this was me going back and forth with Mark Chiarello, who was the editor and art director, who I really think he's a great guy. I'm sorry he's not there anymore. Eventually, Dave Taylor's name came up, and did anybody ever see his Robin origin that Denny O'Neil wrote? It's amazing. And R.I.P. Denny O'Neil, by the way. It's fantastic. And I had seen it and was very, very taken by it. And I said, this guy would be great. I think this guy would be really great. And Mark knew that he was totally, Dave Taylor's father was an architect, and he was totally into architecture. And this story was going to be very much about architecture. So Dave could sit and draw a building, and which would become, in the story, Wayne Central Station. And it kind of went on from there. but all of Dave's art was done in pencil, and then he would digitally scan it in and then digitally ink it, but also make it look like it was still done by hand.
One thing that I loved about this book, you mentioned Dave Taylor and his architectural background, and like the acknowledgments of the book in the very beginning, it shows a picture of old Wayne Central, and in the corner it says, after Tulsa's Boston Avenue Methodist Church.
Yes.
I grew up in Oklahoma. I've driven by that church 1,000 times.
Wow.
And I just really thought that was really cool to see something kind of not my hometown, but where I'm from in this book.
Well, that's all Dave. That is all Dave. I basically described what I thought this thing should look like, and then he did the research and said, I think we should base it on this building. And I said, great. That looks great to me.
Before we wrap it up, have you been reading like the current stuff with Batman and DC? Have you been keeping up, or have you just been like really busy with it?
How do I say this diplomatically? I'm trying to think of the most recent Batman comics I've read. I'll be honest. I don't get this Batman who laughs with the thing around his head with the point poking out. I don't get that. I don't know what that is. It doesn't appeal to me. I think it's grotesque and unpleasant.
Have you read any of the Tom King Rebirth stuff?
I have not. I've read interviews with him, and he seems like a great guy. Very interesting guy, but no, I have not. I'm trying to think. Really, the most recent Batman thing I read was The Golden Child.
Oh, okay. Is that the one shot with Frank Miller with Carrie Kelly?
Yeah.
Nice.
And I guess before, all Frank all the time, and before that, DK3. Yeah.
The artwork in The Golden Child was absolutely outstanding.
Yes.
Is that Raphael Grandpa, right?
Okay, hey, we got to talk about this. Yeah,
this is actually pretty funny.
Yeah.
Because for years I wanted to talk to you, and then I didn't know how to get in touch with you. And then all of a sudden, after Golden Child, Golden Child came out, I get this DM from Chip Kidd. And he's like talking about a commission.
I thought you were him.
I was like,
Gramps is going to commission you some Texas barbecue.
I was like showing these guys. I was like, dude, Chip Kidd just asked me for commission. The reason why I thought
that's gorgeous. Look at that.
Wow, I've seen that. That's amazing.
Oh,
the reason why I thought this, Chip, is because around Christmas time I made like some sketch covers for some guys and had them on my thing. Holy shit, he saw this.
Word's getting out.
Yeah, word's getting out. I'm popping the streets. And then Robin says, I thinks you're Raphael Grandpa. And I'm like, oh, man.
Well, what else am I supposed to think?
Don't worry, he's been called worse.
Chip, I'll offer you $400 for that.
All right.
Hey, man. It's like 1986 all over again.
Yeah.
Raphael Grandpa's great.
What an amazing guy. The first time I noticed his work was the cover of Marvel's Strange Tales. And I'm like, what the fuck is this? And it was just so interesting, all this stuff he was doing to the costumes.
Yeah.
And he's just incredible.
Yeah, I love his black and white statue is really nice too. I think he's from Brazil, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he's in Brazil, and he is very followable on Instagram, and he seems like a really cool guy. Frank adores him.
Yeah.
Do you collect all the black and white statues as well?
I do not. I'm so impressed with the vast array of them, and so many of them are just absolutely brilliant. I have Darwin Cook's, and R.I.P. Darwin Cook. I mean, holy living shit. I mean, what a great artist and writer. What a great writer he was, and he was so nice to me. And I have Mazzucchelli's, and they did one that I did with Tony Millionaire, which you were
yeah.
probably totally unaware of.
Yeah.
And it's very wonky and very funny.
Yeah,
but,
I have that one. That one's cool. I like it because it's like a almost like distorted and almost monstrous, but cool and abstract. I was digging that one.
Totally insane. Last year at San Diego Comic-Con, they have this new Comic-Con museum in San Diego, and for the opening part of the show was they showed every single one of them, the black and white statues all together on one wall, and it was really quite something.
Yeah, they had that life-size McFarlane one too, huh?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And what an enterprise to gather all of those together. I was speaking to Jim Fletcher at the con, and DC Direct, DC Comics, nowhere in the company do they own a full collection of all of the statues. So they had started, right? They had started borrowing them from employees and friends, bringing them in.
But that's so typical. Like, when I, not to non sequitur, but like when I put the proposal for Batmanga together, Paul Levitz was still the editor-in-chief. And I had about 40 pages of material, and the cover that really became the actual cover. And I just, I got an audience with him, and I sat in his office, and I'm like, here. And he's looking at this thing, and after about 5 or 10 minutes, he said, "I've never seen this before in my life. This is amazing. Do we own this?" And it's just like, how can you not have this in your archive? How? I've been in the DC archive many times. It's like, how can it be incomplete? How can you be this institution in America and not have everything? But they don't.
Do you think we'll get a Chip Kid Batman museum one day? Because I know you get a lot of requests for tours for your collection and whatnot. And I just think maybe one day it'll be, who knows?
It would be quite a small museum. That's a really good question. I need to figure out where all this stuff is going to end up, because I don't want to sell it. And I don't want it to just all go into storage like at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I don't know. It's a really good question, especially with these Batman black and white covers, because there's about 150 of them now.
Wow.
Holy shit.
They represent an incredible range of artists and designers and thinkers, and I want all of those to go to one place. Like, in my heart, I would love them to go to the Smithsonian, but only if they'd be interested. We haven't had that conversation yet. I have absolutely no idea.
Oh, that would be a cool place for them to go, though.
Have you ever thought of maybe making that into a book one day?
Yes.
Because I can see it translate effortlessly.
Yeah. For years, I had been wanting to try and turn it into a book. I want to try and do, in the next couple of years, is just self-publish it. So there's no censorship, and I could get to include everything and just make it, just so there's a record of it. But I won't be able to sell it. So it'll have to be some kind of charity project for somebody. But yes, I have to collect them in a book, because these all have to be seen together to be believed. It's amazing.
Well, thanks again for everything, Chip. Thanks for your time. We have been wanting to talk with you for years. We have talked about you for years, and you are one of the prime figures, not only in the graphic design world, but the world of Batman fandom and comic book fandom in general. You're a great advocate for it, and people who really love this medium truly recognize that and what you add to it. So thank you so much for your time, and we look forward when you get back up to New York and back to your collection.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate it, and my heart's in it. I love this stuff. I love this stuff more than anything. I hope that shows in the work.
It always does.
Absolutely.
Always does. So you take care, Chip Kid, and we'll be in touch soon.
All right.
Take
care.
Take care.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
Hey, Gotham dwellers. Make sure to stop everything right now and subscribe to Bat Force Radio. We can be found on iTunes and SoundCloud. Don't miss out. Guaranteed to satisfy all of your Batman and DC needs.